did Satan's little time unfold, and above all, when did it begin? How long is it? How did he proceed, and what developments were there that were an expression of his agenda? That is the destruction and cover-up of the Millennium Kingdom, and everything it stood for. Can we recognize his signature of forcing social change in history through chaos, trauma, and conflict? When did the beast rise again, meaning the ancient Roman Empire, and replace the Millennium Kingdom? Is the change linked to astrological cycles and energetic changes? Let's look at the first half of Satan's little time in detail. The transition between the ages was smooth, as always. But when exactly did Satan's little time begin? It's hard to say, but I can see two possibilities. Possibility 1. At the height of the Renaissance in the first third of the 16th century. The little time is therefore 500 years long, and only 450 years have been inserted into the chronology of the previous eras. Possibility 2. At the height of the Enlightenment at the end of the 18th century. The little season is therefore 250 years long, and around 700 years have been added to the chronology of the previous eras. In the Renaissance, the first foundations were laid for the Great Deception, and a return of the Roman Empire was made possible. The beast of the first century, the Roman Empire, was able to rise again, after it was completely destroyed by a cataclysm around 65 to 76 AD and by the return of Jesus Christ around 76 AD. This is why all roads lead to Rome again today, which will become very clear in the course of these videos. The word Renaissance also comes from renascere, and means to be born again, to rise again, to reappear, to be renewed. Sounds a lot like the return of Lucifer's ideology, and the return of the beast, the Imperial Rome. This Renaissance painting by Michelangelo is an example of the return of atheistic philosophies from ancient Rome and Greece. Historians roughly divide the course of our history into three major eras: Antiquity, 800 BC to 500 AD, the Middle Ages, from 500 to 1500, and the Modern Era, from 1500 to today. The core of this revision of history presented here is that past chronologists have added several never-existing phantom centuries to the area of antiquity, and, in addition, the epoch referred to as the Middle Ages was in reality the 1,000-year kingdom prophesied in the Bible under the royal rule of Jesus Christ. According to this, the modern era is the prophesied little time of Satan that follows the Millennium Kingdom. There are some reasons to assume that the transition took place in 1776. Or that this year represented an important turning point in the change of the ages. And it is possible that this year is actually the year 1326 because of the 450 phantom years. There are simply too many things that coincide with this year, although it should be noted that transitions of ages, that is, astrological transitions of cosmic energies, are always somewhat fluid. Most people who talk about Satan's little time assume a time span of 250 years. And who can blame them? The English translation contains the word season, which creates associations of a quarter of a time span, just like the 4 seasons of a year. And the only meaningful period of time that this season could refer to is the 1,000-year kingdom of Jesus mentioned before, so 250 years makes sense, because it is a quarter, or season, of a millennium. But in the older Greek translation there is only the word chronos, which simply means time. So it just says little time. So we only know for sure from the context that it is a shorter period than 1,000 years. But it could well mean more than 250 years. Perhaps it is 2 periods of 250 years each. Accordingly, the year 1526 could have been roughly the beginning of the little time, the year 1776 the climax, and the year 2026 the end of this age. These 3 sections represent important key positions in Satan's little time. This results in 2 pleasantly even periods of 250 years each, with the year 1776 as the center. As I said, these dates are pure speculation on my part. It is a team effort by the entire Little Season community to put the pieces of the puzzle together correctly. At the beginning, when the Millennium Kingdom under Jesus was still fresh, and at the end, with the beginning of the Great Awakening in 2001 and accelerating in 2012, Lucifer's minions probably had and have a more difficult time. Astrological processes must be taken into account here, and I have noticed a clear connection. When wandering stars on the firmament, or planets of the solar system, come into an astrological house of the Earth's zodiac, the effects are always transpersonal and generational, meaning they're long-lasting and felt by everyone at the same time. The astrological effects are repeated with each cycle, which is why our history rhymes so often. The longest cycle and the one with the strongest effect is that of Pluto. It takes a whopping 248 years to pass through all 12 zodiacs once, so its effect in a particular zodiac can only be experienced once in a lifetime. Some houses will never be experienced. On January 20th, 2024, Pluto entered Aquarius, remains there until September 1st, then briefly moves back into Capricorn, only to return to Aquarius on November 19th. It will then remain there for the next 19 years until March 8th, 2043. If you look at the history of the last Pluto cycles, we can expect absolutely historic and profound changes in the next few years. April 2024 in particular, with a total solar eclipse and the Devil's Comet returning after 72 years, had two rare celestial events at the same time. The year 2024 is therefore extremely special astrologically and marks a shift in human consciousness. The energies of Aquarius are associated with intellect, truth, independence, idealism, eccentricity, spontaneity, rebellion, and the big picture. Pluto rules the collective and generational cycles of transformation. It stands for the symbolic, ongoing process of birth, death, and rebirth. It is associated with the hidden and buried, both metaphorically and literally. It represents humanity's relationship to power and shadow and the collective development of patterns around these themes. So you can imagine the absolutely world-changing effects of Pluto in Aquarius. The change of sign of Pluto indicates a new era and a seismic collective change for all of humanity. These times are very much associated with revealing what is hidden, finding out what is really going on, who is really in control. And I think this time it's the satanic network and its ring of pedophiles. We've already seen an above-average amount of this in 2024, and more will come in the next few years. We had major mainstream revelations of the elite pedophile ring, through the new participant list of Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Island in January, the release of the Quiet on Set documentary in March, and the revelations around P. Diddy and his arrest in April.
The homes of Sean Diddy Combs. You know him as Diddy, formerly Puff Daddy, big-time rapper, big-time producer, big-time superstar, and now the feds at his houses in both locations.
The second last Pluto-Aquarius constellation in the Great Cycle was between 1528 and 1547, a period characterized by the Reformation and Counter-Reformation in Europe, which led to a social rethink of Christianity and a lasting change in the ecclesiastical power structure. The printing press, which became established during this period, brought about an information revolution. Humanism changed the thinking of intellectuals at this time, and a new understanding of the earth and the cosmos spread among scholars. Many new places and cultures became accessible and conquered through sea voyages. The period was also characterized by religious wars, assassinations, and upheavals. Pluto was last in Aquarius between 1776 and 1795, and this time was also an absolute game changer that was used by Satan's minions for their purposes. The year 1776 in our reckoning of time seems to have been the middle threshold here in Lucifer's little time. There were several related things that fall in this period of the Enlightenment that also fit very much with the energetic effects of the Pluto-Aquarius constellation. The founding of the Illuminati order, the American Revolution and the British-American War, the French Revolution and the abdication of the monarchy, and the founding of the United States of America. It could also be possible that during this part of the cycle, Aquarius, who is literally pouring out an amphora of water, and Pluto revealing the buried, could also manifest geologically. This means that a long and heavy period of rain leads to many floods and mud floods, and the liquefaction by earthquakes causes submerged remnants of past cycles to resurface and others to sink. This would explain the aftermath of a devastating mud flood in the early 19th century observed by so many. There was also a known flood in 1530 in which 600 houses in Rome collapsed and thousands of people in the countryside drowned. A similar flood occurred in the Netherlands at the same time. This flood, known as St. Felix, is considered one of the greatest disasters in history. On the so-called Evil Saturday, November 5, 1530, much of Flanders and Zeeland was flooded and 100,000 people died. An entire city and 18 villages were completely destroyed, and likewise at the time of the French Revolution, a particularly cold and snowy winter was followed by a particularly warm and rainy spring in 1784. This led to several catastrophic floods across Europe, including the most devastating the continent has ever seen since 1530. A severe fog over the northern hemisphere, caused by a volcano eruption in Iceland, contributed to the weather phenomenon. In 1783, a mysterious dry fog enveloped the continent of Europe, blood-red sunsets were reported throughout the summer, and many reported a sulfuric smell, breathing difficulties and sore eyes. The Europeans were unaware that this was the result of a devastating event unfolding in Iceland. Many other phenomena were recorded throughout the year, including earthquakes and unusually frequent thunderstorms, leading to 1783 being dubbed an Annus Mirabilis, a year of awe. This flood, which has gone down in history as the Millennium Flood, destroyed large parts of the Rhine region and killed up to 10,000 people. Floods had occurred on rivers throughout northern France, the Netherlands, Spain, Poland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Hungary, Slovakia, and Slovenia. Because all the flooding events had occurred simultaneously on different rivers and cities that were sometimes hundreds of miles apart, I became very curious about exactly what had caused such widespread devastation. As it turned out, wintertime flooding in Europe wasn't the only weather-related disaster occurring in 1783 and 1784. Climate-related problems were happening over much of the world. Satan's Little Time and the Millennium Kingdom are also climatically separate. Between the 15th and 19th centuries was the Little Ice Age, a globally cool phase with reduced solar radiation. Today, historians estimate that the Little Ice Age and its recurring yield collapse was one of the factors that triggered the Reformation in the 17th century and the French Revolution in the 18th century. In contrast, very warm temperatures prevailed in the Middle Ages, especially between 900 and 1400. Temperatures in Europe were at the level of the mid to late 20th century. This is now referred to as the medieval climate anomaly because it disrupts the narrative of continuously rising temperatures due to man-made CO2. Fitting, Satan's influence chills the world, while Jesus' influence provides warmth. And similar connections can be seen again today, with the Pluto Aquarius constellation from 2024 to 2043. The world is in the midst of a new information revolution, which will once again provide fertile ground for upheaval. Almost everyone alive today is looking for radical change, and there are many different views on what this should look like: more national, more liberal, more diverse, more social, more climate neutral, more shareholder capitalism. There are many flavors today. The world is also facing a new order of military and economic world powers, shifting from the US and their allies to China and their allies. And above all, humanity is on a threshold beyond the world will be transformed to an intangible extent, due to breakthrough advances in artificial intelligence, gene therapies and nanotechnology, as well as the potential emergence of extraterrestrial life. As with the Pluto cycle in the 16th century and the 18th century, a new philosophy spreading among intellectuals paved the way for this: transhumanism. And like every Pluto shift, this one is and will be characterized by wars, assassinations, and upheavals.
I see something that said, take a look at what happened.
And 2024 has so far even topped the previous years, which were already flood-rich, with devastating and deadly floods in Brazil, Germany, Italy, France, Belgium, Texas, Florida, Kenya, Tanzania, Dubai, and China. I will now discuss the beginning, the Renaissance, and the climax, the Enlightenment, of Satan's little time in more detail. (1503) Lucifer's very first act would be to move into the Vatican, infiltrate the highest office and bring it under his control, the Pope. And indeed, this period is considered a very unusual time for the papacy. Pope Julius II ruled over the empire from 1503 to 1513. His very name could be a reference to Gaius Julius Caesar, the return of the Roman Empire. Julius II was one of the worst popes. He treated his subordinates very badly, he was aggressive, he had extramarital relationships, some of them homosexual, and he fathered children. He had many enemies and there were several attempts on his life, which is why he introduced the Swiss National Guard for his personal protection. He was the one who allowed the sale of indulgences, opening the door to corruption and spiritual deception. He used the proceeds for a radical and unpopular renovation of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. The renovation created the Vatican's current center of power. I think it could be possible that Satan's little time began with him. Lust and greed slowly became more widespread again. 1510. On behalf of his order and accompanied by a confrere, Martin Luther traveled to Rome at the end of 1510 or 1511. There he was shocked by the lack of spirituality and also met the Dominican Johann Tetzel, who sold so-called letters of indulgence, which were an act of grace by which, according to church teaching, temporal punishments for sins are remitted, but not the sins themselves forgiven. These letters are quite misunderstood today. Indulgences were not bought, as many assume, but were normal penitential practices. People asked for forgiveness of their sins and in return they offered spiritual work. Monetary donations to the church were just one of several options. However, this practice eventually led to corruption, with the clergy lining their pockets. This made Luther angry and provoked him to write the 95 Theses, in which he denounced indulgences and the Pope in general. Since Pope Julius II knew no mercy, had people killed without restraint and had great military ambitions, Luther called him a blood drinker. Perhaps Luther meant this much more literally than historians assume today. 1517 to 1540. Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the castle church in Wittenberg on October 31, 1516, triggering a revolution. Whether he chose the date, on the Feast of the Dead, known as All Souls' Day or Samhain, to send a symbolic message is unknown. 60 years earlier, book printing had been invented with the Gutenberg press, and so his theses spread rapidly from 1517 onwards. It was the beginning of the Reformation and the birth of Protestantism. With the Edict of Worms on May 26, 1521, the imperial ban was imposed on Martin Luther, making him public enemy number one. The year 1529, the second year in the Pluto Aquarius constellation, saw the Lutheran Reformation gather pace. The Wikipedia article on the year 1529 lists 10 dates of important events that are tagged with the keyword Luther. In addition to Martin Luther, there were other heroes of the early Reformation in Switzerland and England: Huldrych Zwingli, John Calvin, and King Henry VIII and his son. The Reformation, and the religious wars that later ensued, were the first of many wedges that were driven into Christianity to break up the Catholic monarchy of the Millennium Kingdom. To say the Reformation was world-changing would be an understatement. It had fundamental effects that are still felt today. Protestantism made religion subjective, whereas before there was a decisive authority. This Catholic unity was now divided into a more Protestant north consisting of the United Kingdom, northern Germany and Scandinavia, and a more Catholic south consisting of southern Germany, Austria, France, Ireland, Italy, Spain and Portugal. And above all, it was the mainly Protestant countries that were the first to transform themselves into secular liberalism that still prevails today. Protestantism also gave rise to many other splinter groups, which will also be discussed in the course of the video series. 1540. Ignatius of Loyola, a soldier turned mystic, founds the Jesuit order, also known as Society of Jesus, with the permission of Pope Paul III. This papal religious order is a wolf in sheep's clothing and was instrumental in rewriting biblical history and the cosmology of the Earth. They have always attached great importance to science, as well as teaching and Christian missions. And they still do today. Just a decade after their foundation, they were accused of secretly striving for power with the aim of spreading atheism and considering any means legitimate. Distrust of this Catholic shadow government only grew in the 17th and 18th centuries, which is why they were gradually banned in Europe, the American colonies, and by the Pope between 1756 and 1782, and had to cease their activities. It was not until 1815 that the Society of Jesus was revived by the Pope and gradually allowed to operate again throughout Europe. But to this day, mistrust of the Jesuits has not diminished. 1534, 1539 and 1611, Luther's German translation of the Bible was first published in 1534. It is likely that he was a member of a version of the Rosicrucian order that already existed at the time. Interestingly, Luther's cross uses a very similar symbolism of a cross, a rose, a heart, and the color white. I could go on forever about the esoteric symbolism of the rose or hawthorn in relation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus Christ, Catholicism, the heart chakra, and our redemption. But that will have to be a topic for another time. In 1539, the Reformer King Henry VIII authorized for the first time an English translation of the Bible, the so-called Great Bible. And in 1611, King James published the most popular English translation of the Bible to date. It was written by Francis Bacon, alias William Shakespeare, a Rosicrucian. Thus Matthew 24 verse 14 was fulfilled, according to which the gospel would be proclaimed to all nations shortly before the end. The resurrected, as mentioned in Revelation 20 verse 5, can now either accept or reject the word of God. Now even the common people could understand the Bible, and not just scholars with a knowledge of Latin as before. Free will is now provided for the resurrected, which is likely the whole purpose of Satan's little season. 1545 to 1565, the Council of Trent takes place, and is considered the beginning of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The Jesuits were deeply involved and excluded Protestants. At the council, it was decided which books of the Bible would be considered part of the official canon in the future. The biblical story and its understanding was thus further watered down. Did they remove a book about the little time of Satan? It just seems so odd that this period is merely hinted at the very end of the last book, as if it would have referred to an already known book of prophecy. Pasquale Catti was a Vatican painter under Pope Gregory XIII and a pupil of Michelangelo. He painted a very symbolic picture of this historic meeting in 1588. You can see the Council of Trent. To his right is the Holy Spirit, in my opinion symbolic of the Millennium Kingdom. To the left, in the foreground, you can see Roman gods with a fasces, a globe, a few strangely modern-looking files, and in the center you can see the whore of Babylon with her large crown. Behind her, a woman holds a golden chalice. She is the beast in the book of Revelation and a symbol of the ancient Roman Empire. And in the middle, the Council of Jesuits is in session, symbolically representing a crossroads between the Millennium Kingdom and the resurgence of the beast. 16th to 17th century, shortly after the council, a long period of several religious wars began in Europe, between alliances of Protestants and alliances of Catholics. 3 religious wars were fought in France between 1562 and 1570. St. Bartholomew's Day on August 23, 1572 was supposed to bring both sides together and reconcile them. However, the Catholics committed treason and attacked the Protestant leadership. A cruel massacre ensued, which resulted in heavy losses for the Protestants. Several more wars followed until the end of the century. Both sides also used unscrupulous mercenaries. It took time for the Reformation to turn bloody in Luther's homeland. Between 1618 and 1648, the 30 Years' War wreaked havoc in Germany, and the famines and epidemics that accompanied it. In some areas, 2/3 of the population died and misery prevailed everywhere. The wars between the Catholics and Protestants eventually developed into wars for hegemony. Europe became a religious patchwork quilt and was divided into the more Catholic South and the more Protestant North. I think here fought the remnants of the Millennium Kingdom against themselves, falling for the deceptions of Lucifer's minions without the presence of Jesus Christ. In some places this conflict can still be felt today. For 100 years, there has been a modern-day resurgence of this bloody conflict between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants have been deeply in hate of each other there for 800 years and have fought each other with terror. This never-ending civil war cost over 3,500 lives between 1968 and 1998 alone, and some history of this will be discussed in later videos. The war between Protestants and Catholics was the classic divide-and-conquer tactic in terms of the problem-reaction solution. The image was built of an evil and cruel ruler who had to be overthrown for freedom, and this was orchestrated from within. The Catholics were infiltrated by the Jesuits, and the Protestants were infiltrated by the Rosicrucians. To this day, Lucifer uses this tactic over and over again. He builds up a violent and greedy ruler, controls the opposition, and then kindles in people the desire to overthrow him in order to gain freedom. This was the case with the Reformation, it was the case with the Enlightenment, it was the case with the World Wars, and it is currently the case with the left-wing revolution against the evil bankers, capitalists, elites, and the patriarch. All of this is ultimately aimed at achieving the same subversive reactions with God and the saints in the last spiritual battle. (1550 to 1650), a defining factor of the Renaissance and the religious wars, which is rarely considered from the perspective of the Millennium Kingdom and Satan's little time, is the period of witch hunts. The peak of the witch hunts manifested itself in 3 waves between 1550 and 1650. The number of executed witches was once reported to be 9 million, but today's historians consider this to be exaggerated and estimate figures between 40,000 and 60,000, with large regional differences in the number of deaths. I think this period is one of the most misunderstood today. During the Millennium Kingdom, the energy and atmospheric conditions were completely different to those of today. This has to do with the plasma cycles of this earth, and their connections to our spirit and bodies. Check out Daydreamers if you've never been down that rabbit hole. To cut a long story short, the saints of the Millennium Kingdom had profound alterations in their bodies and minds given by the Holy Spirit, which today would probably be interpreted as superpowers. For example, they would have a halo around their crown chakra through biophotons. Ever wondered why holy people are depicted with a shining head or halo? In all cultures and religions? This has to do with so-called biophotons. When neurons are active, they emit measurable amounts of photons that even leave the skull. Since the amount of biophotons in rats, for example, is much lower than in humans, one could conclude that the level of biophotons is a marker for consciousness. And enlightened people with a higher level of consciousness and a fully activated energy system literally are emitting light. They would have the ability of levitation, like the Franciscan Joseph of Cupertino in the early 17th century. This is fairly unknown among Christians, but there are many accounts of saints who, according to several intellectual witnesses, mastered the ability of levitation. Most of them lived an ascetic lifestyle. Francis of Assisi, the founder of the Franciscan order, was also able to fly. And that was just one of several miracles. He also had stigmata, that he received at the end of a 40-day fast. Stigmata, in Catholicism, are bodily wounds, scars, and pain which supernaturally appear in locations corresponding to the crucifixion wounds of Jesus Christ: the hands, wrists, feet, near the heart, the head, from the crown of thorns, and back, from carrying the cross and scourging. The Spanish-born Catholic mystic Teresa of Avila was also able to levitate 1 meter above the ground, and she also received the stigmata in a religious ecstasy in an encounter with Jesus. In another mystical apparition, angels appeared to her and shot an arrow of light into her heart, setting it ablaze. These are real energetic processes in our energy body, and all Christians should strive for being born again through fire, but as I said, a topic for another time. Catherine of Siena was another saint from Italy who could levitate during prayer, even as a child. She also received the stigmatization from Jesus. And a priest claimed to have seen the Holy Communion wafer fly from his hand directly into Catherine's hand. So she also possessed the ability of telekinesis. And in a kind of mystical wedding, she and Jesus exchanged hearts. Once again, this is the activation of the Christ spark in the heart chakra. I will likely talk about the saints again in future projects, but my point is, faithful people of the Millennium Kingdom, that were blessed by the Holy Spirit, through prayer, celibacy and fasting, could amplify the toroidal field of their energy body so much, that some developed the ability to levitate. Give them a broom and you get the picture of a witch. They also had other abilities. The ability of telekinesis, the ability to heal by laying hands, or the ability of prophecy, which many Catholic mystics of the time had, and yes, also the ability of physical regeneration. I think that's what was meant by eternal life. The strengthening of the body's own energy system by the Holy Spirit could actually cause eternal life. So extremely slow aging and supernatural wound healing powers in some righteous living people, especially if they lived an ascetic lifestyle. This small spark in the hearts of people today was once a great flame in the Millennium Kingdom. These saints, not all of whom were with Jesus on Mount Zion at the North Pole, would be the greatest enemies in Satan's little season. I am convinced that there were also people who made contact with demons, such as the Nephilim spirits, or Satan himself, through incantation rituals. And there were some people who used their energetic powers for selfish and sinful purposes. This may have increased with the beginning of Satan's little time, when he tried to gain more human helpers for his cause, which is the rebellion against God. In the Middle Ages, witchcraft was defined as an alliance between a person and the devil that would undermine and threaten the Christian foundation of society. If someone was accused of witchcraft in the Middle Ages, it was only in the context of heresy. Since Jesus had already defeated the forces of evil, belief in the existence of witchcraft was actually considered heresy. The person was brought before a church court, and, contrary to popular belief, was punished mildly in the vast majority of cases. The aim was repentance and rehabilitation of the soul, and in most cases they only received short prison sentences. Torture and executions were relatively rare. Yet this distorted image of the bloodthirsty Middle Ages is perpetuated by pop culture, and above all to drag the Millennium Kingdom and Christianity as a whole into the mud. Overall, the data on witch hunts in the Middle Ages is very thin, but we know there weren't any witch hunts at all in the early Middle Ages. And the few towards the end were no comparison in quantity and cruelty to the extent of the persecutions in the 16th and 17th centuries in Satan's little time. In 866 AD, Pope Nicholas I banned torture and instead demanded a vow of truth by laying hands on the Bible, something that is still used in courts today. In 1080 AD it was even forbidden to condemn witches to death. It was only when Heinrich Kramer published the Malleus Maleficarum, also known as the Witch's Hammer, in 1486 that the wind changed. Just before the Renaissance, mocked as a senile madman in his hometown of Innsbruck, he managed to convince Pope Innocent VIII of his views on witchcraft. The book only gained popularity in the 16th century, which lasted well into the 17th century, and was republished dozens of times. It shaped the period of witch hunts, as he provided the basics of how to recognize witches and how to kill them. I may come back to it in the future. Many Christians today believe the Bible would condemn any form of powers as witchcraft, but there are many ambiguities here. There are several references to witchcraft in the Bible that strongly condemn such practices. For example, Deuteronomy 18 verses 11 to 12 condemns anyone who casts spells or is a medium or spiritist or consults the dead. Anyone who does such things is an abomination to the Lord, and the Lord your God will drive out these nations from before you. End. Which makes sense, because it opens one up for deception by the Nephilim spirits, who can disguise themselves as dead relatives or angels, for example. And in Exodus 22 verse 18 it says, "You shall not suffer a witch to live." It has also been suggested that the word witch in the Hebrew original could be a mistranslation of poisoner. On August 25, 1538, Martin Luther joined a table talk, where there was much discussion about witches and sorceresses who poisoned chicken eggs in the nests, or poisoned milk and butter. Luther quotes himself in his book Luther's Small Catechism. "One should show no mercy to these women. I would burn them myself, for we read in the law that the priests were the ones to begin the stoning of criminals." Luther's view of practitioners of magic as quasi-demons was at odds with the Catholic view that emphasized choice and repentance. But how can one kill such holy and quasi-supernatural people who possess regenerative abilities? Creative methods of murder and torture were devised until it was finally realized that beheading or burning at the stake were the only effective methods of killing a person with cellular regenerative powers, just as the Romans did with the apostles in the 1st century. The San Marno altarpiece in Florence, in my opinion, reveals the basis behind the ideas of the Malleus Maleficarum and what the witch hunts were looking out for. Here the two saints Cosmas and Damian are executed, but it doesn't work out intended. The fire is thrown back by their powerful Taurus field. When they try to drown them, they float to the top, and they survive the stoning and crucifixion without a problem. In the end, only beheading kills them. Interestingly, the official justification for the burnings is that burnt corpses can no longer be resurrected for the day of Armageddon. All of this is, of course, rejected by modern historians, and the witch hunts are dismissed as nothing more than ignorant mass hysteria. But on the whole, there was indeed an extermination of people with supernatural abilities behind it. Just not in the way we were told. The interpretation that the witch hunts were merely an expression of male misogyny, as claimed by some feminists in the 1970s, is also simply wrong. Historical documents prove that witchcraft accusations were primarily made by other women, and in Finland, Iceland, Estonia, and Russia it was mainly men who were the victims of the witch hunts. Of course, many innocent people were also defamed and executed. And this hysteria was intentional and part of another problem reaction solution strategy by Lucifer and his henchmen. What had previously been a belief that some people possessed supernatural abilities, which were sometimes used to protect the people, now became a sign of a pact between the people with supernatural abilities and the devil. To justify the killings, some Christians of the time and their proxy secular institutions deemed witchcraft as being associated to wild satanic ritual parties in which there was naked dancing and cannibalistic infanticide. Again, the energy of the Pluto Aquarius constellation of revealing the buried and hidden shadows of society is manifesting here. And with that comes the exposing of the blood-drinking Satanists. It created a generalized fear of people with powers, caused a lot of unnecessary suffering and trauma, only to then, in the age of Enlightenment, free humanity from the excesses of this superstition through science. But behind this body's own energy system is only a science that has not been understood. Or rather, the ruling bloodlines have ensured that it is never understood by people and that these forces are forever relegated to the realm of myth and pseudoscience. So that these powers are only accessible to the ruling bloodlines. In the first half of the 18th century, torture was gradually banned. The Witchcraft Act of 1735 put an end to the traditional form of witchcraft as a legal offense in Britain. In Austria, Maria Theresa outlawed witch burning and torture in 1768. 16th century, biblical cosmology, which had great similarities with the cosmologies of all ancient peoples, was gradually replaced by a new, atheistic, heliocentric model. The work of various astronomers of the time played a key role here. Nicholas Copernicus and his De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, as well as the astronomic works and inventions of Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler, and Galileo Galilei. This period between 1543 and 1687 is also known as the Scientific Revolution and is regarded as the link between the Renaissance and the later age of Enlightenment. During this time, great progress was made in the fields of physics, astronomy, chemistry, and biology. They basically took the true cosmology and reverse engineered into the exact opposite through mathematics, or more appropriately, mathmagic. During this time, the 4 island sections and the 4 rivers at the North Pole, the Garden of Eden, and the magnetic mountain, Rupes Nigra, located there, were also removed from the world maps. It is the basis on which all other Luciferian agendas are built. By hiding creation, the Creator himself is called into question. When the Creator is called into question, the Scripture and prophecy are naturally also called into question. It created the lie of lies, making humanity susceptible for more deceptions. Being unable to recognize what's in front of them, and rather listen to Lucifer's minions than their own senses and inner voice. And all of this makes all of Lucifer's other deceptive agendas possible in the first place. It is the basis for the theory of evolution. And this was necessary so that humanity would eventually see the manipulation of genes through gene therapies as a natural step in human development. Which is just a repetition of the Nephilim giants' agendas, meddling with the creation. The spinning ball in the open vacuum of nothingness also created the basis for the soul-crushing philosophies like nihilism in the Age of Enlightenment, and a comeback of atheism. So the ultimate inversion of truth, that man created God instead of the other way around. It created a multi-generational trauma for all of humanity, who were born into a world without God and purpose. Fertile ground for hedonism and an amplification of the sinful nature of man. 1582, a papal bull by Pope Gregory XIII decrees the general use of the Gregorian calendar. This helped to erase the Millennium Kingdom from history. Gregory XIII was a friend of the Jesuits and Ignatius of Loyola. For example, he promoted the Jesuit universities founded by Ignatius, which from then on taught a new view of the universe. By 1749, there were already 700 Jesuit universities throughout Europe and hundreds more followed all over the world. Everywhere they went to missionize, they left behind universities. The Jesuit College in Ingolstadt received 3 Jesuit teachers in 1549 as a result of an agreement between Duke William IV and Ignatius of Loyola. Adam Weishaupt, the later founder of the Illuminati order, was also taught at the university. Some Jesuit universities are still elite schools today. 1594 to 1595, the French chronologist Joseph Justus Scaliger publishes several influential works in which a new chronology of human history is presented. His work De Emendation Temporum in 1583 was to revolutionize the ideas of ancient chronology, that is to show that ancient history was not limited to that of the Greeks and Romans, but also that of the Persians, Babylonians, Egyptians and Jews, which had previously been neglected. And he showed that the historical narratives and fragments of each of these groups, and their different systems of chronology must be critically compared. In the remaining 24 years of his life, he expanded his work into emendation. He succeeded in reconstructing the lost chronicle of Eusebius, one of the most valuable ancient documents, especially valuable for ancient chronology. He printed this in 1606 in his Thesaurus Temporum, in which he collected, restored and organized all chronological relics preserved in Greek or Latin. With these works, the Millennium Kingdom continued to get covered up, and Scaliger used the Gregorian calendar for his work. Here, a few centuries may have been inserted into the chronology, and the history of antiquity stretched out. And the second coming of Christ and his reign were simply forgotten. Officially, he was at odds with the Jesuits, who were supposedly among his greatest critics, but the symbolism in his portraits and his published works suggests that he belonged to a secret society. (16th to 17th century). During the colonization of Africa, Asia and North and South America, many artifacts were looted by the major European powers and locked away from public view, for example by the Vatican's secret archives. The Vatican Secret Archives, now renamed to the less suspicious but still interesting name Vatican Apostolic Library, was formally founded in 1475 by Pope Sixtus IV, and Pope Julius II ordered an extension to the building. It contains 75,000 codices and 1.1 million books. Or the artifacts were simply destroyed. As a permanent war was waged on the open sea during this time to weaken the trade of other nations, regardless of whether the nations on land were at war, many of the artifacts also lay at the bottom of the sea. This hid evidence of past civilizations and especially the Millennium Kingdom. The pirates roaming the seas and coasts also played their part here, and are linked to the Illuminati through the skull and bones symbolism. (16th century). The Renaissance saw the rise of humanism, meaning placing man above God, and the rediscovery of atheistic principles of ancient Roman concepts and ancient Greek philosophies. Humanists wanted to see themselves as part of a new age and scornfully rejected the previous age known as the Middle Ages. Middle Ages reduced the glorious Millennium Kingdom to a slip between the Lucifer-dominated ages of antiquity and the new Renaissance. Renaissance humanism also had an impact on jurisprudence and revived the classical Roman law of antiquity. Humanism began in Italy and spread from there first to France and then throughout Europe. The Reformation was shaped entirely by humanists such as Philip Melanchthon, Martin Luther's most important partner. Incidentally, Joseph Justus Scaliger learned Roman law from the humanist jurist Jacques Cujas. His father, Julius Caesar Scaliger, was also an important early humanist and, interestingly, was also in contact with the prophet Nostradamus. His father's origins and past are obscure today, and he was apparently accused even then of creating a false identity of origin, something these elites still like to do today. These Renaissance humanists demonstrably despised the Middle Ages and admired Roman antiquity. Could this bias be reflected in the chronology of history drawn up by Scaliger? I think so. Humanism, of course, also formed the philosophical basis for the world philosophy currently being constructed, transhumanism, so placing machines and artificial intelligence above man and God. (1614). The Rosicrucian order addresses the public with an anonymous manifesto and announces its existence and agenda. Further manifestos followed in 1615 and 1616. The manifestos emerged in Kassel in the dark of the Protestant Reformation and sought to renew the Reformation, which had stalled almost 100 years after Luther. The Rosicrucians emerged from a group of Lutheran reformers from Tübingen. This group of friends of Tobias Hess were followers of Chiliasm. In other words, they believed in Millennianism and the imminent coming of the Millennium Kingdom in the first third of the 17th century. However, the opposite was probably the case, as the Millennium Kingdom had already been over for almost 100 years. Hess, who who was also attracted to mysticism and alchemy, had many friends. Among them were lawyers, clergymen and scholars, such as the theologian and mathematician Johann Valentin Andrea, who had an enormous influence on the Protestantism that was emerging at the time. As we know today, he was the author of the three aforementioned manifestos of the Rosicrucian order. They warned of a rapid technological development that social development would not be able to keep up with, which would ultimately lead to conflict. According to the legends contained in these manifestos, the order was allegedly founded around the year 1400 by a certain Christian Rosenkreuz. At the age of 16, he went on a world tour for several years, Damcar, Egypt, Fez, Spain and back to Germany, and learned esoteric knowledge from Turkish, Jewish and Persian magicians, as well as possibly from Sufi and Zoroastrian masters. The Rosicrucian order was founded around the year 1400 when he was almost 30 years old. It had therefore already existed since the 15th century, and Martin Luther and Francis Bacon could well have been members, at least according to legend. Christian Rosenkreuz is said to have lived to be a proud 106 years old. His body is said to have been found 120 years after his death by a brother of the order in a perfectly preserved state in a crypt inside the earth. The inscription on the tomb is said to read, "Visit the bowels of the earth. Through rectification you shall find the hidden stone." The legends surrounding Christian Rosenkreuz are numerous and presumably often allegorical. He is said to have been Lazarus resurrected by Jesus in his previous life, or he was in fact simply Francis Bacon. One of the members of the Tübingen circle of friends from which the Rosicrucians emerged was the lawyer Christoph Besold, who taught Roman law at the Jesuit college in Ingolstadt and was a friend of Johannes Kepler. Later, when Katharina Kepler, Johannes Kepler's mother, was prosecuted on witchcraft charges, Besold was one of the jurists dealing with the case, which was dropped. He was not the only one of them who was a friend of Kepler. The Tübingen circle of friends also included the astronomer and mathematician Wilhelm Schickard, who was a convinced heliocentrist and sometimes worked with Johannes Kepler. He invented a handheld planetarium. Simon Stadion was the numerologist and prophet of the group, according to whom the Pope would fall in 1604. Others of the circle of friends were connected with the nobility of Württemberg. It is very clear, in my opinion, that this Rosicrucian order, which grew rapidly after 1616, played an important role with the Protestants at the time of the Reformation. They and the Jesuits both had a role to play in the rewriting of history and the new interpretation of Christian eschatology. It was not until much later that the Order of Gold and Rosicrucians was formally founded within the ranks of German Freemasonry in Frankfurt in 1757. But by then there were already many who had joined the movement. In the 19th century, several other Rosicrucian orders followed within Freemasonry, particularly in England and the USA, which still exist today. The French philosopher, mathematician and early scientist René Descartes first published what he considered to be the most fundamental truth, "I think, therefore I am," in Discourse of the Method in 1637. With this, however, he only pointed out the most fundamental error of the collective psyche. He equated the noisy thinker in the head with the feeling of beingness that comes from being present in complete silence. He reduced endless consciousness to the very limited ego mind that is trapped in a constant state of unfulfillment and creates illusions of separation. The fundamental truth is actually only, I am. Descartes attended a Jesuit university and his membership of the Rosicrucians is disputed. The initials of his name have been associated with the acronym RC frequently used by the Rosicrucians. Furthermore, in 1619 Descartes moved to Ulm, which was known as the international center of the Rosicrucian movement, and on his journey through Germany met Johannes Faulhaber, who had previously spoken out personally in favor of joining the Brotherhood. Descartes dedicated the work entitled The Mathematical Treasure Trove of Polybius, Citizen of the World, to the learned men throughout the world and especially to the distinguished BRC, Brothers of the Rosy Cross, in Germany. The work was not completed and its publication is uncertain. 1651. The 30 Years' War, started by rebellion or Reformation, and the other religious wars of the time, were so cruel, destructive and traumatizing to the collective psyche that they were already laying the groundwork for the separation of church and state. The creation of trauma in order to force far-reaching social change is a tactic that Lucifer's henchmen still use today due to the enormously high success rate, and which therefore runs like a common thread through our history. Never again should popes be allowed to command military troops in the name of God. This is why the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes published his now best-known work, Leviathan, in 1651, named after the biblical beast in the Book of Revelation. In it, the idea of a sovereign was postulated for the first time, to whom absolute power is transferred and who enters into a social contract with the people. The people irrevocably and voluntarily surrender all rights of self-determination and self-defense to the sovereign. In return, the sovereign protects the people from each other. This would be roughly the idea of the state as we know it today. An omnipotent, absolutist monster that permanently enforces peace. And it was an attack on the Christian monarchy, of King Jesus Christ, and the first step towards the idea of liberty. More on this later. For in this idea, it would not be pure divine grace that would give the king the right to rule, but an, albeit irrevocable, agreement with his subjects. The seeds of democracy, on which the later Luciferian revolutions could build, were thus already planted here. The above-mentioned Rosicrucian Christoph Besold also published state-heretical approaches to the sovereign. 16th to 17th century, little by little, the world was rediscovered and conquered. References to past advanced civilizations were taken by the explorers of the nobility and the Jesuits, and were locked away or were reinterpreted. The Jesuits were particularly active in Asian countries such as China, India, Indochina, Indonesia, the Philippines, Japan, as well as North and South America and Ethiopia in Africa. Until they were banned in 1773, the Jesuits' missionary activities mainly involved exporting the dogma of the new heliocentric cosmology and the new chronology. In 1660, the founding of the Scientific Royal Society in London followed under Rosicrucian influence. This scientific society further promoted the deception and is responsible for many expeditions of the 17th and 18th centuries. They are still active today and are therefore the oldest society of their kind. Its French counterpart was the French Academy of Sciences, founded by King Louis XIV in 1666. A highly symbolic year. These were the first academic gatekeepers to hid artifacts like skeletons of giants, but similar institutions followed in the 19th century. Let us now look at the climax of Satan's little time, the Age of Enlightenment. Let's take a look at the second possibility, or the second wave of Satan's little time. The beginning of the so-called Enlightenment around the year 1700 finally signaled the beginning of the end of the millennial empire. The Age of Enlightenment between 1700 and 1800 saw the development in Europe and North America of overcoming all structures that hindered progress through rational thinking. In plain language, this meant religion and monarchy. They were to lose their power and significance for good. The word Enlightenment, or Age of Enlightenment, also refers to an intellectual and social reform movement from 1780 onwards. The most important characteristic of the Enlightenment was reason as a universal authority of judgment. This also included the fight against prejudice and the turn towards the natural sciences, the plea for religious tolerance, and the orientation towards natural law. What all sounds very nice to today's ears, buzzwords such as tolerance, are still used today, is the manifestation of a struggle between two diametrically opposed spiritual forces. Lucifer's rebellion against the monarchy of God came to earth with the fall of the angels from heaven. After a first round of spiritual warfare in ancient times, a loss to Jesus Christ and Archangel Michael followed, which ultimately led to Lucifer's millennial prison term in the abyss. He was then set free again, and a second and final round of this rebellion against God followed, in which all people have participated ever since, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The core of this conflict is the definition of the nature of man and the concept of freedom. Is man born in sin, and should he strive for freedom from sin? Or is man born good and should have the liberty to sin? The creator of the earth and humanity holds the view that a strict order creates a harmony that creates the conditions for redemption from sin and leads to fulfillment. However, one of his creations, the proud angel Lucifer, was of the opinion that this strict order leads to stagnation. He postulated another way. By implementing dualism, that is, introducing negativity into paradise, the necessary tension for the growth of creation would be generated, and, with the knowledge of heaven, humanity could free itself from the ignorance imposed by God. Chaos would therefore have to be generated as a motor of development, so the exact opposite of the divine order against which it is necessary to rebel. Only in this way, according to Luciferianism, could creation grow and ascend to higher dimensions. However, according to the biblical understanding, this ascent to heaven is given by God and His Son Jesus Christ as long as one becomes aware of one's sinful nature and the sacrifice on the cross, accepts Jesus as the Son of God, asks for forgiveness for past sins, and is freed from the burden of sin by following the divine laws. It is a person born in sin versus a fundamentally good person. It is service to others versus service to oneself. It is order versus chaos. It is my God versus me God. It is humility versus pride. It is ultimately life versus destruction. For this rebellion, Lucifer, and the third of the other angels who joined his rebellion, was cast out of heaven by God. In doing so, Lucifer passed the torch of knowledge from this higher plane of existence to us humans. Here he continues his rebellion, and now revenge for being cast out against God. Here you see a common symbol of the age of enlightenment during that time. The Roman goddess Minerva provides the light of knowledge, bringing together the religions of the world. The similarities to Lucifer, the light-bearer, are obvious. These fallen angels continued the rebellion on earth, created the serpent seed, created chimeras and monsters, and created the Nephilim giants. Since then, the spiritual war has also been raging on earth. Noah's Ark and the flood, the Baal cults of Babylonia and Canaan, and the destruction of the Tower of Babel were just a few of the many acts of this war. At some point, God sent His Son Jesus Christ to earth to set things right once and for all. He taught by example, taking on the past sins of mankind in His sacrifice while being murdered by the henchmen of Lucifer, the Roman Baal cults. And the proposed theory of this video is that His return, the capture of Lucifer, the delivery of the Holy Spirit, and the Millennial Kingdom thereafter have already taken place here on earth. Jesus Christ has already proven that a paradisiacal kingdom of heaven on earth is possible under the holy order of God, and the beautiful cathedrals today are the silent witnesses of this glorious time. And now, in the age of enlightenment, or likely already in the Renaissance, Lucifer was released again and allowed to take the reins again undisturbed. And he picked up right where he left off 1,000 years earlier. Only this time he can be even more organized, because this time he doesn't have Jesus Christ and the archangels breathing down his neck. So he continues his rebellion against God by handing over divine knowledge to humanity in order to free them from the bondage of God's monarchy, by creating chaos in the order and by persecuting Christianity. The philosophy of the Enlightenment philosophers, liberation through intellect and knowledge, is therefore almost identical to the religion of Luciferianism. There are also some similarities in terminology. Reformation and protest, like in Protestantism, are just other words for rebellion. And the time of enlightenment fits with the angel of light, who became the dark Satan through his fall, who, according to his followers, delivered the torch of knowledge and enlightened humanity. Illuminism, again, light, which built on the age of enlightenment, gave reason a truly spiritual dimension. This religious and philosophical movement of the 18th to early 19th century contained influences from Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, Western esotericism, and Eastern religions. It is sometimes contrasted with the socio-political Enlightenment and seen as a spiritual reaction, or corrective to the Enlightenment's dependence on reason. Followers and writers of Illuminism were revolutionaries and often also members of Masonic lodges, like Karl Gotthelf von Hund, or members of the Illuminati order, like Karl von Eckhausen. Other Illuminists such as Martinez de Pasquale, Louis Claude de Saint Martin and Jean-Baptiste Willermaz founded Martinism, a form of esoteric Christianity, and the short-lived Order of Knight Masons elect priests of the universe, or simply Élus Cones, which was active in France between 1767 and 1774. We will take a closer look at all three main points of the Enlightenment: the founding of the Illuminati order, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution. After the Jesuit order was gradually banned by the kings of Europe in their homelands and their colonies in the mid-18th century, Pope Clement XIV, under pressure from Enlightenment thinkers, officially declared the Jesuits outlawed throughout the Holy Empire in 1773 with the letter Dominus Ac Redemptor. Many see this step as an important marker in the transition to the secularity of Catholicism. At the time, the kings sensed secret ambitions for power. The Jesuit-led reductions in the colonies were increasingly becoming a state within a state. They were also accused of being the masterminds behind certain assassinations. Even after the ban, the mistrust never completely ceased, as Jesuit activities continued in Prussia and Russia and the ban was not properly enforced everywhere. The sudden death of Pope Clement XIV a year after the ban was imposed was seen as a poisoning attack by the Jesuits. The ban of the Jesuits was to prove temporary, but the time was ripe for a new force of Luciferians. On May 1, 1776, the Illuminati order was founded by Adam Weishaupt in the city of Ingolstadt, Bavaria. Adam Weishaupt attended the Jesuit college in Ingolstadt and obtained a doctorate in law here in 1768 at the age of 20. I mentioned this college multiple times before, as it was also attended by the early Rosicrucian Christoph Besold, who in 1637 taught Roman law there. The Jesuit College of Ingolstadt was one of the first Jesuit colleges and was an important base for the Counter-Reformation. From 1772 onwards, Adam Weishaupt taught law as a professor and converted to Protestantism. His way of thinking was influenced by his godfather Johann Adam von Eichstätt, who in turn was a great advocate of Christian Wolff, probably the most influential German philosopher in the early Enlightenment period. On May 1, 1776, Weishaupt founded the Order of the Illuminati in the Bavarian electorate. Weishaupt initially selected 5 of his students as the first members. The word derives from Illuminatus, meaning enlightened. May 1st was probably not chosen at random, as Belton is also celebrated on this day. This is one of the 8 festivals in the Druidic calendar. It marks the beginning of summer and the start of the beautiful season. The night from April 30th to May 1st is known as Walpurgis Night, and was considered by witches to be the most important ritual and Sabbath day, when contact is made with the devil around a large bonfire, with dancing and psychedelic substances. The satanic connection to this date must have been well known, especially at the time. The members of the Illuminati order gave themselves aliases. Weishaupt called himself Brother Spartacus. Since the discovery of the so-called Swedish box, a box full of lists of members of the Illuminati order and the Freemasons, it has been known that Johann Wolfgang Goethe, probably the most famous poet in history, was also an Illuminati member. He gave himself the nickname Gallius. The box was to be donated to a Swedish lodge, then came into the hands of the Gestapo and was finally confiscated by the Soviet Union at the end of the Second World War, which is why it could only be examined by historians from 1991 onwards. The order grew rapidly and at its peak had over 2,000 members in Bavaria, Prussia, France, Hungary, Italy and Poland. The order was officially banned by the Bavarian government as early as 1785 and is said to have finally ceased its activities in 1793 at the latest. The Bavarian king felt threatened by their anti-religious and anti-monarchical stance. But it is much more likely that the members of the order simply went underground, or simply infiltrated Freemasonry. The boundaries between these two organizations are blurred anyway, as there were several dual memberships. For example, there is also the association of the Illuminati Order Minerval Church of Stagira, founded in Bonn in 1781. According to Adam Weishaupt's classification of the Illuminati Order into three classes, Minervals, or disciples of Minerva, were members of the second degree. When the order was banned in Bavaria in 1785, the people of Bonn also dissolved their Minerval Church of Stagira. However, Elector Max Franz was an enlightened man and said at the time, "I assume that there are good, honest, and capable people among Illuminati and Jesuits alike, without the order being to blame for the behavior of one or the other." Most of the Bonn Illuminati continued with their plans and founded a reading and recreation society on December 1, 1787, which was tolerated by the Elector. The Illuminati order was closely linked to the German aristocracy, and I would like to shed some more light on this. Because most people in the conspiracy culture only focus on American Freemasons and the British aristocracy, and ignore the outstanding role the German bloodlines have in the Luciferian power structure. Let's get started. The Prussian King Frederick II, or Frederick the Great, who also became king of the entire Prussian Empire in 1772, came from the German noble family of the Hohenzollerns. It was Count Albrecht Wolfgang Schaumburg-Lippe, also a German noble family, who was not only the first ruling nobleman in Germany to become a Freemason, but who also introduced Frederick the Great to Freemasonry in 1738. They were both members of the St. George zum Kaiserhof Hamburg Lodge, the oldest German Masonic lodge. After his accession to the throne, Frederick the Great continued his Masonic activities at Charlottenburg Palace, where he established a lodge for the nobility. In 1740, he accepted his brother-in-law Duke Ferdinand Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel into the Masonic Lodge, who in turn became Grand Master General there. Prince Karl of Hesse-Kassel was the Danish stadtholder of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, and founded several Masonic lodges in Europe. Now, the so-called strict observance was a high-degree system of German Freemasonry at the time, which was already in recurring crises from 1772 onwards. They were plagued by internal disagreements about the name, direction, and future of this Masonic high-degree system. The formal foundation of the Illuminati order in 1776 was already a reaction to these crises. The whole thing culminated in the Wilhelmsbad Convention of July 16, 1782, where the alleged origins of strict observance in the Knights Templar, and the supposed existence of secret superiors at the head of the order turned out to be fabrications. The strict observance thus lost much of its appeal and quickly disintegrated after 1782. However, this benefited the Illuminati order, where Ferdinand Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel and Karl von Hessen-Kassel became the most important new members. The successor to the Hohenzollern dynasty was the nephew of Frederick II, Frederick William II, who ascended the Prussian throne in August 1786. He was known for his interest in occultism and mysticism and appears in membership lists of the Rosicrucians. He was also a great fan of contemporary composers such as Ludwig van Beethoven, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Joseph Haydn. The latter two composers were friends and both were members of the Viennese Masonic Lodge zur Wahren Eintracht from 1784, to which Mozart also brought his father Leopold. This lodge was led by Ignaz von Born, who was also a member of the Order of the Illuminati and bore the code name Furius Camillus. The opera The Magic Flute, which premiered on September 30, 1791, was intended as an allegorical and popular representation of the Enlightenment ideals of Freemasonry, with Ignaz von Born as the model for the wise man Sarastro. However, Beethoven also had contact with the Illuminati. The aforementioned Reading Society, which emerged from the Bonn circle of the Illuminati in 1787, had some interesting members over the years, including Karl Marx and Eugelius Schneider. Schneider taught at Bonn University, which brought Beethoven into early contact with the French Revolution. One of the founding members of the Reading Society was the composer and Freemason, Christian Gottlieb Niffy, who gave Beethoven piano lessons for a time. His Illuminati alias was Glaucus. Niffy was also a member of the Masonic Lodge Caroline to the Three Peacocks. Franz Anton Ries was also a member of the Bonn Illuminati and the subsequent Reading Society, and gave Beethoven violin lessons. Nikolaus Simrock was a horn player at the court of the Elector of Cologne in Bonn and a music publisher of both Joseph Haydn and Ludwig van Beethoven. He was a good friend of the Beethoven family and, of course, a member of the Bonn Illuminati and later their Reading Society. Both Ries and Simrock were also members of the Masonic Lodge Les Frères Courageaux. The reason I say that is that I really want to drive home the point that there were often dual memberships between the Illuminati and Freemasonry, and the Illuminati certainly continued to exist within the Freemasons. Also, is it conceivable that these composers, who are still celebrated today, were making their songs according to Pythagorean teachings, for example by using sacred harmonies within the solfeggio frequency scale? I think so. The numerological cult of Pythagoras of ancient Greece plays a major role within these secret societies. And it's another sign of the resurging of the beast. It should be mentioned the relevance of the German nobility, which is an incredibly powerful part of the ruling Cain bloodlines. For the German House of Coburg is the origin of many powerful European dynasties. Franz of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld married into the House of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel through Sophie Antoinette. They fathered 7 children, who founded powerful dynasties and forged wide-ranging ties with other European houses. They gave rise to the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, whose descendants changed their name to Windsor in 1917 and became today's British royal family. There was even a connection to the German imperial House of Hohenzollern. Their son Leopold became the first king of Belgium in 1831 and was also a Freemason. His descendants still make up the Belgian royal family today. And son Ferdinand gave rise to the House of Coburg-Braganza, which ruled the Kingdom of Portugal until the monarchy was abolished there in 1910. The Bulgarian Tsardom also has its roots in Coburg. There is an interesting symbol that has run through Lucifer's power structures for centuries, and which is closely linked to the German bloodlines. The skull and crossbones. An ancient symbol of death and poison. On August 9, 1741, King Frederick the Great founded the 5th Hussar Regiment of the Prussian Army, which was initially called the Regiment of Black Hussars. They wore black hats with skulls and bones in an X shape. They were regarded as a merciless and feared cavalry unit in the Prussian wars of the 18th and 19th centuries, like in the 7 Years' War or the War against Napoleon. They existed until 1917. Friedrich Wilhelm von Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel was Prince of Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel and a Prussian general. The so-called Black Duke adopted the symbolism of the skull and crossbones for his Hussar regiment, also known as the Black Squadron, which became famous throughout Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. And of course the skull and crossbones symbolism was adopted by Wehrmacht soldiers of the First World War in honor of the Hussars, as well as by the German Freikorps of the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. During the Second World War, the Luftwaffe fighter squadron used the skull and crossbones. And of course the SS in the Nazi regime had a skull and crossbones on their uniform, and the 3rd Armored Division of the SS had the skull and crossbones on their insignia. The SS was of course also regarded as particularly merciless and loyal and also had aspects of a mystical secret society. Frederick William of Prussia was the last crown prince of the German Empire from the House of Hohenzollern until the monarchy was abolished in the November Revolution of 1918. And he was an important supporter of Adolf Hitler. Today, German historians believe that Wilhelm made a significant contribution to the establishment of the Nazi dictatorship through his activities, particularly in 1932 and 1933. In the early years of the Third Reich, he effectively campaigned for a military dictatorship under Hitler and joined the SA. He also liked to wear the skull and crossbones, for example on the historically important Potsdam Day, in reference to the hussars of his great-great-great-great-grandfather Frederick II. This celebration to mark the reopening of the Reichstag is regarded as Hitler's seizure of power and was attended not only by Prince Wilhelm but also by his three brothers Prince Eitel Friedrich of Prussia, Prince Oscar and Prince August Wilhelm, a Oberfuhrer of the SA. Prince Wilhelm's role in the Nazi seizure of power even led to a legal dispute between the present-day German government and the present-day Hohenzollerns concerning compensation payments to the public purse. To add insult to injury, the Hohenzollerns then sued the German government and demanded compensation payments for expropriations after the Second World War. This made them extremely unpopular and hated by the German public, which is why they rejected the demand. But where does this symbolism come from? Where did it originate in Germany? The origin lies with the Order of the Skull and Crossbones. This short-lived order of knights in the Duchy of Ols and Lower Silesia was founded by Silvius Nimrod I in 1652. It is not known why he gave himself the name Nimrod, the name of the Babylonian king who rebelled against God. Duke Silvius Nimrod, who appointed the Silesian mystic Angelus Silesius as personal physician to his court in 1649, was influenced by the Silesian Rosicrucians, a movement whose center was located in Ludwigsdorf, the estate of Count Abraham von Frankenberg near Ols. The knights and ladies of the new order were to dedicate themselves to researching the mysteries of God and nature, and avoid unvirtuous behavior. The remembrance of mortality was a central theme, and their motto was Memento Mori. They wore a ring on their left finger with a black bow and a skull and crossbones. The order existed until the 18th century. From 1700, the skull and crossbones on a black background was also used by pirates. This flag, known as the Jolly Roger, came in dozens of variations, sometimes with a saber, sometimes with bones. Hourglasses, a symbol of the god Saturn and the transience of life, were just as often to be seen on it as pierced hearts and devil figures. The term false flag attack comes from the pirates, because they often hoisted false flags to lull their victims to safety until the last minute and only hoisted the Jolly Rogers when it was no longer possible for their victim to escape. And of course the symbol also appears in the Skull and Bones Society founded by William Huntington Russell in the USA in 1832. This extremely powerful Yale secret society produced U.S. presidents such as the Bushes and powerful bankers. In addition, the CIA was founded by Skull and Bones members, as about half of the signers of the National Security Act of 1947, which was the ultimate birth of the CIA, the NSA and the billion-dollar black budget deep state sector, attended Yale and were members of Skull and Bones. In addition, important people in the early days of the CIA were Skull and Bones. According to insider author Alexander Robbins, the Skull and Bones tomb on Yale campus contains several pictures and relics from 18th-century German fraternities, and founder William Huntington Russell was also allegedly inspired to found the Skull and Bones during his regular visits to Germany. Are they the American arm of the Illuminati, who continued their operations there 40 years after they were banned, or are they the German ruling bloodlines? But the Bushes and the CIA, like the SS, have definitely been true to the death and venom motto of Skull and Bones symbolism. Their wars in the Middle East killed millions, caused large influxes of refugees into Europe, caused the rise of Islamic terror, some of which even adopt the skull and bones symbolism, and they played a role in the approval of toxic aspartame. To name just a few of their greatest hits. Some Islamic terrorist attacks also took place on March 22, following the number 322 of their order. And the CIA was involved everywhere. I think these are the most loyal minions of Lucifer, the ruling bloodlines of Germany. The skull and bones will be discussed again in later projects, when we reach the 19th century in Satan's little season. Because this is off topic right now. The American and French revolutions took place during the work of the Illuminati in the Pluto Aquarius constellation of 1776 and 1795, and thus the founding of the United States also took place during this time. On July 4, 1776, just 2 months after the founding of the Illuminati Order, Freemasons celebrated the independence of the United States through the Declaration of Independence written by Thomas Jefferson and adopted by the Second Continental Congress. The signing of this document by the so-called Founding Fathers, almost half of whom were Freemasons, is regarded as the birth of the United States of America, whose colonies were now independent of the British Crown and whose first president was the Freemason George Washington. The entire country was built by the Freemasons, or Illuminati, and plays a crucial role in this saga of Satan. The crown, remnants of the millennial empire under King Christ, was henceforth gone. In 1787 followed the adoption of the United States Constitution with the Bill of Rights, which was signed by all 13 colonies by 1791. The very first of the 10 articles of the Bill of Rights cements the separation of state and religion and ensures religious freedom for all citizens. Which is, of course, a direct attack on the previous age, effectively preventing a new Millennium Kingdom, as well as paving the way for secret societies and their Luciferian doctrines in the long term. Even then, many people suspected that the American Revolution and the founding of the United States of America was an Illuminati coup. In April 1798, the scientist and inventor John Robinson published the book, Proof of a Conspiracy Against All Religions and Governments Carried On in the Secret Meetings of Freemason, Illuminati and Reading Societies. George Washington mentions the Illuminati and this book in a letter to G.W. Snyder. Washington assures Snyder that he is aware of the Illuminati's goal to overthrow all government and all religion, but he does not believe that these teachings are being propagated by Freemasonry in America. Washington says he doesn't have time to read because he's busy with repairs at Mount Vernon. But in another letter between Washington and Snyder, he writes on October 24, 1798, "It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati or the principles of Jacobinism have not spread throughout the United States. On the contrary, no one is really more convinced of this fact than I am. The idea I wished to convey was that I do not believe that the Masonic lodges in this country, as societies, are endeavoring to propagate the diabolical doctrines of the former, or the pernicious principalities of the latter." Washington, D.C. was built from the ground up in Masonic symbolism, and this will be the topic of a future project. The French artist and urban planner Pierre-Charles L'Enfant was responsible for this. At the age of 22, he decided to go to the New World with the Marquis Marie-Joseph Lafayette. Lafayette was not just anyone. He was a French general, politician, enlightener and, above all, a member of the nobility. After the British colonies declared independence in 1776, Lafayette therefore went to America in 1777, against massive opposition from his family. With a volunteer force he had recruited himself, to fight for American independence and his Enlightenment ideals of equality, freedom, and justice. As a general, he played a leading role in the War of Independence against the British. He also played a role in France's subsequent entry into the conflict. During this time, he was inducted into a military Masonic lodge in Morristown in the presence of George Washington. Lafayette later became a member of the Contrat Social Masonic Lodge in France and the Les Neuf Sous Masonic Lodge in Paris. Lafayette is regarded as the most important link between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. He returned to France in 1782 and was celebrated there as a hero. He is also considered a hero of the American Revolution in the USA today. Two pictures can be seen in the House of Representatives in the Capitol today. One of George Washington, to the left, and one of Marquis Marie-Joseph Lafayette, to the right. Lafayette then visited a few German courts in 1785, including that of Frederick the Great, himself also a Freemason and associated with Illuminati of the time. Marquis Marie-Joseph Lafayette is considered an important link between the French and American revolutions, as he became a member of the French General Staff after his return from the USA in 1789. At the French National Assembly, Lafayette presented a draft for the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen on July 11, 1789, based on the American model of the Bill of Rights. The Freemason Emmanuel Joseph Size and Honoré Gabriel Victor de Riquetti, himself a member of the Illuminati order and a leading member of the Jacobin Club, also played a key role in drafting the declaration. King Louis XVI was then forced to sign under pressure, which was the beginning of the end of the French monarchy. Its abolition was the first major milestone in the Illuminati's 250-year plan. He was later charged with high treason and sentenced to death by the Jacobins after an extremely close vote in the National Convention. His public beheading took place on January 21, 1793. Why the Illuminati attacked the French monarchy first will become clear in future videos of mine, because this has to do with Jesus Christ and how the Millennium Kingdom worked. They therefore focused on this first and created the first modern democracy, the United States of America, which emancipated itself from the monarchy and was to serve as a model for the rest of the world. But of course this democracy was just a re-emerging concept of ancient Greece, so again the theme of the resurrection of the beast. And to this day, the USA is the driver of social change. The USA's biggest export product to this day is culture. And in the worst form, at least from a biblical perspective. Here you can see a picture of the 17 articles of the Declaration of Human and Civil Rights made at the time in France. The design is reminiscent of the two black stone tablets of Moses, whose strict 10 commandments of God are the opposite of these human rights. It's a shift from, "You may not," to, "You have a right to." Once again, it is Lucifer's doctrine. Man is God. There is more symbolism, the all-seeing eye at the top. The fasces with a Phrygian cap and an Ouroboros in the center. Let's take a look at these human rights, which once again sound wonderful to today's ears, but on closer examination and biblical evaluation it becomes clear that they only lead to suffering and destruction. One only has to look at the world today, including all of the democracies that like to uphold such rights, to see that they have not led to lasting peace, both internal and external, and deep fulfillment. Let's look at some articles in the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, and you will understand the difference. It starts by removing the biblical God from the equation and replacing him with an unspecified, supreme being. A description that would also be apt for Lucifer. As a result, the National Assembly, in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being, recognizes and declares the following rights of man and citizen. Article 3. The principle of all sovereignty rests first and foremost with the nation. No body or individual may exercise any power that does not emanate expressly from it. Article 4. Freedom consists in being able to do everything that does not harm others. The exercise of the natural rights of every human being therefore has no limits other than those which ensure the enjoyment of the same rights by other members of society. These limits can only be determined by law. Article 5. The law has the right to prohibit only those acts that are harmful to society. Nothing that is not prohibited by law may be hindered, and no one may be compelled to do anything that the law does not command. At the beginning, God's sovereignty is clearly drawn. And then a huge number of definitional questions arise, because what is considered harmful for one person is not harmful for another. And above all, who then determines what is harmful to society, and what causes harm to a person? Article 10. No one may be disturbed because of his opinions, including religious opinions, as long as the expression of these opinions does not interfere with the existing order. Article 11. The free communication of thoughts and opinions is one of the most precious rights of man. Every citizen may therefore speak, write, and publish freely, except in cases where this freedom is abused in accordance with the law. Article 12. A public authority is necessary to guarantee the rights of man and of the citizen. This authority is therefore established for the benefit of all and not for the special use of those to whom it is entrusted. And again, if the individual does not have to decide these things, but the collective of the state and all citizens, then you only have to convince the collective to think in a certain way, which is the reason for the creation of media, and you can not only make previously unthinkable things possible, but also protect them through fundamental rights. And then there is Article 17. Since the right to property is inviolable and sacred, no one may be deprived of it unless a public necessity established by law manifestly requires it, and just and prior compensation has been paid. What is considered manifest public necessity, and who decides how this is defined? It means whatever the collective decides it means. What if your religion is suddenly no longer good for society, but harmful? What if your place of worship requires a legally established public necessity because the collective has been manipulated to see it that way? All of this also falls back on the terms liberty and freedom, which do not mean the same thing. The words liberty and freedom seem to describe the same thing, but they actually mean very different things. Liberty is the permission and right to do something. Freedom, on the other hand, is the actual liberation from something. At first glance, a small difference, but on closer inspection, a huge one. Where does the term liberty come from? It originated with the libertines. The term libertine, obsolete also libertine, from the Latin libertinus, means belonging to the freedman. The libertine of the spirit, in French libertin d'esprit, refers to the free thinker or free spirit. Libertarians, with their attitude of libertinage, are also referred to as supporters of freedom, although they are convinced that freedom ends where someone else's begins. The libertine of morals refers to a person, usually male, who does not feel bound by traditional moral and especially sexual norms and leads a dissolute lifestyle. Libertinage or libertinism, derived from this, refers to a morally dissolute lifestyle. Examples of this are the Marquis de Sade, Aleister Crowley, and Giacomo Casanova. The term immediately brings to mind the book Liber et vel Legis by Aleister Crowley. The famous occultist Crowley would go on to play an important role in the 19th century. The contents of the book were channeled in one of the pyramids of Giza in 1904 by a supernatural being called Iwan. Crowley spoke to Iwan via the medium, wrote everything down in parallel, and then published the book in 1909. Today it is regarded as the most important work of Western esotericism of the 20th century. It became the central sacred text of his newly founded religion Thelema. The book, also known as the Book of the Law, announces the Aeon of Horus, in which only one rule applies: do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This is the essence behind liberty. The Enlightenment thinkers of the 18th century saw themselves surrounded by chains, and, to reiterate, these perceived chains are the laws of God. The age of Enlightenment is clearly directed against God, who in their eyes is a dictator who keeps us all in a prison. That God does not allow them to do whatever they want is seen as slavery. This is the end of this video, but this is just the beginning for this channel. It is more than obvious to me that Satan's little time began in the Renaissance, and that our history is a grand agenda of biblical proportions. It is what Crowley called the Great Work. This 500-year plan aims to slowly invert every aspect of God's order, increase humanity in population, unite them into a swarm intelligence, possibly through a mass possession event, and pit them against the saints at the North Pole in the final spiritual war, following which Armageddon and the Day of Reckoning will come. I will be talking in future projects about Satan's little time in the 19th century, the history of the so-called Cain bloodlines or serpent seed that ruled the world, the Nephilim spirits, the Washington-London Vatican axis, the Second Coming in around 70 AD, the Millennium Kingdom and how Jesus Christ ruled it, and the final spiritual war in the very near future. Are Jesus and the saints still living at the North Pole? How will humanity be convinced to wage war against them? These questions and more will be the content of the next videos, and I look forward to contributing to this amazing community. Please like and share the video to help out the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel to receive notifications of future video uploads. You would help me out a lot. And I am also looking forward to your comments. You can support my work. The links for this are in the video description. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching. Until next time, and God bless.